That's
But
exactly
I
right.
wanted to ask you about Alabama. The
Mhm.
South Florida game, it seemed like they were just playing back and forth, and then it was almost like the rope a dope. Fourth quarter, boom, Alabama. I mean, with maybe like 8, 9 minutes left, it was a very, very close game. Then it ends up like what, 42-16, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, they almost covered.
So when you look at that game, how much of that was that of Alabama's pedigree just being a more deep and a more polished team? And how much of that was Kalen DeBoer just kind of seeing what South Florida had because he didn't have them last year,
Mm.
but using the information that he had in order to formulate what he wanted to do late?
Yeah, well, first off, you got to give credit to South Florida. I think Todd Orlando is playing defensively. You talk about mixing things up. I mean, they threw the whole bag in this game, from a pressure standpoint, from a disguise standpoint, and then it got to the point where he was like, "Look, we're actually holding up a little bit against the run. Let's play man free in the back and see if we can get away with it." And they were getting
Mm,
away with it because doing all this stuff, you do it because you're making up for something, right? I'm having to find a way to sneak you. Well, then you would much rather say, look, I want to rush four and just not have to bring anybody else and protect the back end. I thought USF defensively held up pretty well. They ran the ball well on offense. They can't throw the ball, Dukes. I mean, if they had a semblance of a passing game, that would have gotten even more dangerous for Alabama. But where I'm at with the Crimson Tide right now, they've still got really, really, really good players. They're going to have better players than 90% of the teams that they play. The problem right now is they're just out talenting people. Like the standard at Alabama is not to just beat USF or to beat Mississippi State. It's to win national championships.
mhm,
If you keep playing this unorganized from a penalty standpoint and a turnover standpoint, when you run into a roster that is even or better than yours, and those are out there this year, you are not going to beat them. The thing that made Nick Saban in Alabama the most dangerous when he was absolutely rolling people up and smoking them was not only that they had better players than you, they were more organized than you. They would beat you with talent and organization. That's
mhm.
how you build a dynasty. This Alabama team right now is just surviving on talent alone. And you cannot win. This isn't, oh, Alabama's so much better than everybody else. It's not going to matter. When you run into the games that you're going to run into to win a national championship, whether that's Texas, whether that's Georgia, whether that's Ohio State, hell, whether Oregon figures it out with that roster or Miami, you are going to have to play clean with really, really good players. Kalen knows that. That whole staff knows that. And I guarantee you that's what they're harping on this week. So if you're an Alabama fan, what a high class problem. You guys have played sloppy and you're undefeated, and you can probably play sloppy and beat Wisconsin because I don't think there's a guy outside of the Green Bay Packers roster in that state that can tackle Jalen Milroe.
Mm.
So when I look at if I'm a Bama fan looking at this, hey, we got to get, if we're going to do what we want to do, if we're going to do what is expected now at Alabama, we've got to play clean, or we'll go 10-2 and make the playoff and lose early and get bounced by a team with a better roster. Or we'll play sloppy enough against a team that's just okay and we'll go 9-3 and miss the playoff. That ain't what they
Mm.
want.
Do you feel like a disciplined Alabama team has the capability to go all the way?
Yes, I think they'd have to catch a couple breaks just because if I don't think they have the best roster in college football. I think rational Alabama fans will agree with that because they've seen what what it looks like when they have the best roster in college football, and just the game's changed so much now with the fluidity of the transfer portal and just the overall game. Um, but this Alabama team can win a national championship. A lot of it, I think, is going to have to be with Jalen Milroe running the ball because you can truly get a hat on a hat. And typically, that's not the position you want to be in, right? Because you want to save your quarterback. But Jalen Milroe's built pretty well. He actually runs pretty smart. If you notice, he protects himself really well as a runner and still runs heavy. It's not like Jaden Daniels, where you're like, dude's a buck 85. Like, if you get squared up one time, they're going to be picking up pieces of you for a week.
Right.
This Alabama team can do it. They need to get healthy on the offensive line. But it's weird to say this. They're going to have to catch some breaks to win the whole thing. But pretty much everybody does. But Alabama, a couple more.
Ryan Williams seems to be everything that he was billed to be. First of
Mm-hmm.
all, he already reclassed a year early. He's 17 years old, doing what some people at 22 and 23 aren't able to do, which is be dominant in the SEC at receiver. How high is his ceiling, and how big of a win was that to get him over Auburn and any other school that needed a five-star receiver like Williams?
Yeah, well, look, I don't think Ryan has a ceiling. I think he's got a sunroof. It's just, how high and until you turn into Icarus and melt in the sun. I'll say, it's funny, we're talking about Dylan Raiola and his maturity level. I think as a 17-year-old, I mean, old dude just got done trick or treating a couple years ago. I think as a 17-year-old, him physically is what is allowing him to do this. Like the way his body has changed, and he understands that to play as a 17-year-old at this level, I can be mentally there. I can be fast. I can be really fast. But physically, I've got to be able to not only take hits. Everybody thinks physicality is about just taking hits. Well, yeah, that's true. But if he wasn't physically able to do it, I'd just press the hell out of him. That's what I
Right.
do. I'd just jam him to death. Like, you're not physical to get off the line, I'm gonna throw you out of the club. So I think his physicality has been able to let him translate his ability and his IQ as a wide receiver, which is another very impressive thing. I mean, this isn't a simple action, because all right, it's not just knowing what I'm going to do before the play. All right, I got the call. They may change mid play. Like, I got to know how to stem right. I got to know how to adjust, whether we're running option routes, right? Whether me and the quarterback had talked about a certain situation where, hey, if we think that corner's in quarters because he's inside leverage, then all of a sudden at the snap, he jumps outside leverage to funnel me inside. Well, I know it's cover two. Like, I'm dead in the flat, and I know the safety has got to take care of the corner. Like, it's a moving target. That's what makes guys special, is they can compute things while they're moving. DeAndre Hopkins may be the best in the world I've seen at this. Like, Nuke is incredible at being able to. What made Julian Edelman great? He could adjust during the route, and him and
Right.
Tom had such good chemistry. So it's all that, and it's unbelievably impressive.
So we saw Ryan Williams staying at Bama as the first big win of Kalen DeBoer's era when it comes to recruiting. Now, you're a guy, you're right now, he's not doing the best in Alabama, the state of Alabama, but he still has the number 2 class in the country.
Yeah.
How do you attribute the success that Alabama's having recruiting to Kalen DeBoer having a national imprint, because he's not even getting home talent?
Yeah, and I think it's more about the Alabama brand than it is about Kalen DeBoer being national. Everybody knows he did an incredible job at Washington. He's a really good coach. He's won everywhere he's went. But I mean, Alabama is one of the biggest brands in the sport. I mean, you don't even have to be able to talk really well. You could have a mute sign a bunch of 4 stars at Alabama when you walk into high school with that A on your chest, because they see dollar signs, they see big time games, they see winning, and they see being able to go to the league. And an Alabama offer is worth a lot. You get an Alabama offer, that's worth 25, 30 other offers right on the spot, just like Georgia and some of these other places. So I think it has a lot to do with the brand that is Alabama. And, Kalen DeBoer isn't from the state, right? And you don't have to be from a place to recruit guys at that place, right? But that takes a little more time to cultivate, right? Because he hasn't had, we said the same thing about Hugh Freeze coming into Auburn. Well, why didn't he get a bunch of in-state guys that are really good? Well, he hadn't had time to form those relationships. Like, Kalen DeBoer and his staff haven't had time, the 2-3 years it takes. People are like, man, how is Auburn getting all these guys now? Well, Hugh's talked to him for 2 years, 2.5 years. Like, they know everything about each other. So even if it is at Alabama, bringing in a guy from the outside, it takes time to cultivate these relationships. And Alabama's going to be fine recruiting in state. They're doing a really good job out of state. But Kalen knows he can't just go outside of the commune, and he's got to get a nice amount of guys from in-state, because that's a big deal. And I'm a firm believer in in-state guys play harder for longer. But I think that's a lot of it's the brand of Alabama still just hits at such a high level, even with Saban gone.
All right, last question. We know recruiting is fluid. We talked about it for years. Right now,